I was out scouting in New Mexico, and we stumbled across this snake, which I recognized it as like the king snake. So I picked it up, and then like it bit me. It basically attached itself to my hand. But it moved so quickly. It was the most amazing thing, because it was like I had time in my mind to be like, as I watched its jaws dislocate, I was like, wow, that's so cool.
I'm Theodora Cott. I am the Acting Executive Retail Editor and Events Director at Condé Nast Traveller, and you might be used to our Travellers Tale series that we have live, usually in London throughout the year, but during this time we're doing a special addition to that, which is recorded Zoom conversations, and I'm joined very luckily today by Megan Hine, who is a wilderness guide, survivalist and author. Megan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh no, it's so nice to have you. I just wanted to start by asking how you got into this.
I suppose in a way I kind of fell into it all, really. I was very fortunate that a huge part of my childhood was spent outside. Both my parents were really into the outdoors, so all my family holidays were to Wales, to Scotland and the Lake District. We had a caravan that my parents would tow along behind the car, and we'd go off. And my dad was a geologist originally, before he became a geography teacher, so it was most of our holidays were just go and look at rocks up in the mountains, which is great.
And fossils.
Oh, I loved fossil hunting. Yeah, like particularly like along the coasts and things. Yeah, that was amazing. My dad every year used to run a geography field trip down to the south coast, and I used to love going along, because while he was then teaching the geography with the students, it's like we'd just spend the time like digging out all these incredible fossils out of the cliffs.
Took the fun bit.
Yeah.
How did that take you into? Because you've got such a particular array of skills that, I mean, I'm very envious of myself. I think it's amazing what you do. So it's just, how did you get into that, from fossil hunting to becoming a survivalist?
So I went off to New Zealand in my gap year. It was somewhere I'd always wanted to go. I was given a book called The Land of the Long White Cloud when I was about 8 years old by a visiting cousin who'd come over from Australia, which was a book from New Zealand full of Maori culture, and it had the most beautiful imagery inside it. And I used to hide underneath my covers at night when I was supposed to be in bed and sleeping, and look through at these incredible imagery, and there's something about it that really called to me. And throughout my teenage years, I was really involved with the military cadets. And through that, I took advantage of as much adventurous training as I could get my hands on. So winter climbing in Scotland, whitewater kayaking, and it was incredible. I absolutely loved it. So that combined with this incredible sort of Maori culture, I've just made me really want to go off to New Zealand and explore. So when I left school, I earned enough money through bar work and through working in an outdoor centre down in Dorset, and then went off to pay for a ticket to go off to New Zealand for 10 months, where I ended up actually working in an outdoor centre out there.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's I really wanted to stay out there. I really wanted to stay, because I was training as a raft guide. I was taking people what they call tramping, so going out hiking into the mountains there, and it's so remote. It's a very small, like the islands there are relatively small, but they're so wild, and you can experience a whole range of like environments, just in a few miles. It's absolutely incredible, and I really wanted to stay out there, but I couldn't afford the sort of overseas tuition fees. So I came back to the UK and actually ended up doing a degree in outdoor education up in the Lake District, which I suppose kind of all set me on the path.
And so from there, how did you get into becoming a wilderness expert?
So I'd my 18th birthday present was my summer mountain leader, which is for anybody who doesn't know, is kind of like a basic outdoor qualification that allows you to take people out into the mountains in the UK. And that's how I funded my way through university with that. And I'd picked up some climbing qualifications while I was at uni and mountain biking, and that's kind of how I funded my way through university. But all the way through all of that and taking people out, and I was really into, like, obsessed with climbing and mountaineering. It's like, I'd imagine I was like super boring for anybody to talk to, because it's like I was just fixated on, you know, these routes that I was climbing and these current projects I had. But all the way through that, I felt like something was missing. And I remember very clearly camping out one night. I'd been soloing some rock face, and I was camping out on top of this by myself. And I just remember just being there and just thinking that everything I do is to protect myself from nature. So when I'm climbing, I'm putting in like metal protection into the rock. You know, I'm sleeping in my tent. I'm kind of creating a shield from nature. I wear Gore-Tex, and it's like, I call myself an outdoor enthusiast, an outdoor professional, but I actually know very little about this world that I supposedly love around me. And just a couple of days later, complete coincidence or fate or whatever, a friend of mine had got some tickets to a bushcraft talk. I had no idea what bushcraft was, but I was like, there was free beer, so I thought it was a good opportunity to go along as a student. So I went along, and I was sit there, and I was like, my mind was blown by like the stuff that this guy was talking about. And he was talking about, you know, all the properties of these plants, and they'd started doing expeditions overseas and working with native peoples, and their sort of anthropological element of it was just so fascinating. And I Googled them afterwards, and they were looking for apprentices. So I sent in my CV thinking, well, I've got no bushcraft experience, there's no way I'll get this. And yeah, and then spent a couple of years actually working for them, training with them, started leading expeditions with them, where we'd actually go out and spend time with native peoples and then go out and put those skills into practice. And from there, I then moved out to the Alps, where I spent 10 years, the mountains were calling too much. So I spent 10 years working in the Alps, sort of running outdoor programs, so teaching skiing, climbing, and the survival and bushcraft always came back into that, and leading expeditions as well. And then I started getting into the TV work, because initially I was asked along to rig stunts, to rig kind of the rope challenges and things for sort of adventure TV shows. And then they realized that I'd got the survival and the bushcraft skills as well. And then I suppose it became cheaper to employ one person to do multiple tasks than employ separate people. So yeah, it's kind of in a nutshell.
And then so one thing that I noticed from you have such a reassuring and positive social media presence. And one of the things that I noticed you talking about recently was myths. And I think with bushcraft, so much of it is storytelling and learning through stories that are handed down through generations. How much do stories play a part in the work that you do?
It's a huge part. I mean, from a personal side standpoint, I find it so fascinating. I find like mythology and folklore so incredibly fascinating, because so many native peoples all over the world have very similar stories, and they're peoples that will never have met. So they're like their stories about the stars. You know, there'll be very similar stories in cultures that will never have met, and it's like that fascinates me so much that people can come up with these stories. But it's also a lot of native cultures, their spirituality and, you know, their belief systems and their whole culture revolves around nature and the seasons, because for them the seasons were so important. So, you know, so for us in the UK, like our ancestors would predominantly have been pagan, which is like all about the seasons. And, you know, at certain times of year you celebrate, you know, certain plants and trees and things coming into flower or into blossom and providing fruit. And it was, you know, it was ways to be able to recognize that, you know, hope is coming back into the world again, and spring's here, and there's going to be a time of plenty. Or you know, so like times like Christmas, which is around the time of you know, the longest day, shortest day of the year, and the longest night. and that was a time of celebration because it's like then hope's coming in. So they, you know, maybe they would have sacrificed, you know, an animal which would have been very precious, and up until that point, you know, they've been on rations, and suddenly now, yes, hope's coming back into the world. Because I mean, it must have been crazy, you know, kind of thinking like when we didn't have like the science behind it and that understanding that actually, you know, there are things like seasons and the sun will rise tomorrow, and and the world isn't flat, and you know, you can't sail off the end of it and things. And those things, if you don't have that knowledge, you know, how terrifying must it be to kind of, you know, wonder if the winter will ever end.
And in terms of survival as well, the stories that they would tell each other, even I read somewhere that there's a rhyme about snakes, the coral snake and the king snake, I believe, where it's red touches yellow, kill a fellow, yellow touches black, friend of Jack. And I think that's right. I could have got it wrong, but apparently the fact that most people don't know that rhyme in certain parts of America is now costing them their lives because they don't know which snake bit them. So
yeah, do you know, I actually had a run-in with one of these snakes.
Did you?
So when I first started doing like the TV, like the adventure TV work, it was like in the early days of adventure kind of filmmaking in the way that we kind of make things now, and there wasn't the same sort of budgets and sort of experience and stuff. So, you know, my job would include I'd have like lots of different hats that I'd be wearing at different times, and one of those things was animal wrangling. We'd been out, and like up until this point I'd handled some pretty deadly snakes, and got a little bit complacent about it, and then I was out scouting in New Mexico we were making an advert actually for a big car company, and we were about 24 hours away from help. We'd been flown by helicopter, the helicopter had gone, and we weren't going to see it until the next day because we were going to be camping out, and we stumbled across this snake, which I recognized it as like the king snake, so I picked it up, thinking, oh great, well we can use this on screen, and then like it bit me. It basically attached itself to my hand, but it moved so quickly. It was the most amazing thing because it was like I had time in my mind to be like, as I watched its jaws dislocate, I was like, wow, that's so cool. But it wasn't enough time to be able to move my hand out of the way, and then this thing is like attached to my hand and I can't get it off. And it's like in those moments you're just like, wow, did I actually get that rhyme the right way around, or is this like, or like, am I about to go down? So thankfully
right.
What's that, sorry?
You did get it right though, I hope.
Well, yeah, I'm still here, so yeah, but it was definitely a wake-up call, because for the next half an hour, you're kind of like, wow, like what's going to happen now? But it was definitely a wake-up call, like, just how fast these things move, and and how important it is to have the right person for the right job, and animal handling is not one of my fortes.
Well, I think you handle it well. You clearly got the right snake to have a fight with, so that's something. So tell us about your book, because I know you've written a fascinating book.
So Mind of a Survivor was a book that I wrote this a few years ago actually, and it was an amazing experience. I think I'd written an article for some newspaper, and off the back of that I had like several literary agents get in touch, and being somebody who ties knots for a living and rubs sticks together, I'd never thought that that writing a book was actually ever on the horizon. So so I had these literary agents get in touch, and I just thought, wow, this is actually this could be a really cool adventure. So I took it on, not realizing how big a task it really was, but it was such an amazing process. And basically, like, I wanted to explore the question of why do some people walk out of a survival situation alive or appear to thrive in those conditions, whereas other people just can't? And no matter how much they try or want to, they just can't. Maybe they sit down and and lose their motivation to keep going. And it was like exploring that, and exploring also, because when I was younger, I read the books on the explorers, Shackleton and Oates, and all these incredible explorers. and I always used to kind of think, well, they always talked about like the physicality of these expeditions, and, you know, the frostbite and the pain and things, but they never really spoke about the emotional aspect of it. And I wondered why that was. So part of my exploration in writing Mind of a Survivor was to explore that a bit more. And it was something that I'd noticed that I do myself, and something that I noticed that clients do as well, is, you know, separating out your emotions. And funnily enough, like when I was writing the book, the hardest part for me was actually remembering the stories that would then tie in with each theory that I put forwards. And I realized that was because I don't remember any of those stories particularly with much emotion, because when you're in that moment, you know, if you're in a sort of a life-threatening situation, you have to be able to manage your emotions, and the way that I do that is those emotions go into like what I see as kind of like this metal box in my head, and the lid gets shut down, and it just clears my mind, and it allows me to take control of the situation. And so when I am thinking about those stories, you know, I'm not remembering them with much emotion, because there was never any emotion really in the situation when I dealt with it. So I thought that was really interesting. I'd imagine, you know, like a lot of explorers and adventurers, and people, particularly when you're responsible for other people as well. And, you know, I know this from paramedics that I've spoken to, you know, people who are in a sort of high risk environments or dealing with quite traumatic experiences on a daily basis. They have to find ways of being able to manage that, things like fear and anxiety. Otherwise, those emotions will just overwhelm you.
And how did you learn to do that, to put it in a box? Do you think anyone can learn it, or do you think it's a certain type of person?
No, I think because ultimately it's resilience, and I do think that resilience can be learnt. I think resilience is something that is easier to kind of grow and to foster when you're younger, as a child, when your brain is much more malleable and it's going through a developmental phase. Because when we get to it's around like our mid-20s, our brain patterns and like the neurons and the pathways and things are quite set, and it becomes much harder to get into the brain and actually change things. And you can do, and but it's more of a manual kind of intervention rather than like an automatic kind of update or upgrade on the program that's running.
Yeah. And so could you tell when you're doing any of your wilderness leading, can you tell who's going to suffer from fear more than others? Is it something that you can spot in a person, or is there a moment when you can tell?
Yes. Yeah. So the first time I meet people, often on the expeditions, is at the airport, when we've arrived in country. So those things are very right from the start. It's about listening to intuition and your instincts on somebody, which is something that is kind of bred out of us a bit, I think, and trained out of us when we're younger, because there's that whole treat other people as you expect to be treated, and be nice to everybody, but don't get into a strange person's car. And that's quite a mixed messaging thing, and particularly I think for young girls in particular, because we're kind of still brought up in a way where we need to smile a lot and be seen and not heard, and and all of these things, and then it becomes the programming that runs through our lives. So it then becomes much harder to actually really listen into our instincts on somebody. And that first impression, when you first meet somebody, if you feel a little bit off about that meeting, there's something that your subconscious is picking up on that's telling you that something is wrong, or something not quite right in that interaction. And learning to listen to that instinct and that intuition is really, really important. But I think in our culture, we then start feeling guilty about feeling that way about somebody else.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then when you are doing one of these wilderness guiding experiences with your celebrity clients or whoever they may be, I just wanted to ask, when there is a moment that there should be fear, a healthy amount of fear, what is it? Is it worse to have someone who has too much fear and becomes paralyzed or runs, that fight or flight, or is it harder to work with someone who has no fear at all?
It's easier for me to work with somebody who does who is paralyzed by fear, because then it is very, very hard to work with them, but it's about them building up the trust and starting to push their boundaries, like within the safety net of my own boundaries, or limits. And it's about building up the trust with that individual, so that you can achieve what they're trying to achieve. It takes a lot of patience, and it's incredibly difficult to manage somebody like that when you've got a group with you where nobody else is in that situation, and that has to be done through communication. Whereas somebody who doesn't necessarily feel fear in the same way, so last year got to work with Alex Honnold, the rock climber, who is just incredible, and his mindset is absolutely fascinating. And he has a similar mindset to certain top base jumpers, and guys and girls that are seriously kind of pushing the limits of human endurance within like the adventure arena. And they don't feel fear in quite the same way that we do. There's kind of like a dampening in the sort of receptors of the brain to some extent.
But that's thing that they were born with, is that right? It wasn't something that they taught themselves. It's kind of like a superpower, as far as I understand it. I could be wrong.
Yeah, so it can be, you can be born with it, or it can be a series of events that happens in your childhood that can lead to that happening. Yeah,
it's amazing. So when you're working with someone like Alex, he, as far as I understand, he's had to teach himself to respect the risk that he's taking, because it's not immediately evident to him. Is it quite hard to work with someone like that, especially when he finds challenges so exciting?
Yeah, so Alex, we were filming with him. He was, he worked within the boundaries that we kind of set up there. I worked with an Olympic snowboarder a few years ago on another project, and he was one of the hardest people that I've ever actually had to work with, because he didn't feel fear in the same way, and it's incredibly hard to contain somebody like that, particularly if it's on TV and they're trying to show a certain aspect of themselves and things. And when I'm ultimately responsible for that person's safety and welfare, and I'm potentially facing some massive legal case if something happens to them, it can be really, really hard to manage that person. I mean, Alex is understanding. He's got the empathy. He's very understanding of the whole process, and as you said, he understands that within himself as well, and understands kind of how to sort of play the game a bit with that side of things. Whereas some people like this snowboarder was that was really, really tough.
What did you do?
Well, for working with that, I mean, it involves everything. This is the boring side of the job. Everything has to be risk assessed, and everything has to be in writing, so that ultimately you can back yourself up. Communication is key, so it's having those those talks with that person, and with the production team as well, so that there's that conversation between all parties of what we will and won't allow, and how we work with what we've got there to create it, and giving that guy as well, creating the trust there that we are going to represent him in the best way that we possibly can.
So obviously you have such an exciting, varied job that involves a lot of energy as well as mental strength. How are you coping now with the current situation with the lockdown? How are you keeping yourself motivated and coping with being locked in?
Well, I'm very lucky actually. I live by the sea, so although I'm not going up into the mountains, which half an hour up the road from me, I am exploring the coast and running and training and kind of using this time to kind of iron out some of the aches and pains and things that being constantly on the road and out in these environments brings on. I did notice it, like in the first month, I was just I went about my day day thing of like, doing a million different things at the same time. And after that, I was just like, right, I'm really, really tired. Like, why am I so tired? I'm at home. And I realized, okay, like I really actually just need to, build some downtime in as well, and like how important that is, and things. So it's been an eye-opening time as well, kind of coming face to face with yourself, because I think when I'm on the road a lot, I don't have time to process a lot of the emotions and things. I talked about like the metal box earlier, and it's like you put all this stuff into this box, but at some point it's going to start showing cracks or get full. So actually being able to unpack stuff in a safe environment is it's been quite a productive time.
It's amazing. And with aches and pains, do you have any tips on how to deal with them? Anything that you can help? Epsom salt baths or
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, like magnesium salts. Yeah, oh, so good. So for me, I know that I store like a lot of like my stress and things in my hips. I'm very aware of it now, and it's like kind of like when you're walking on ice, everything kind of tightens up in your hip area. So for me, it's like kind of working on that area, and I do a lot of kind of like hip stretches and really kind of getting in and trying to release like the psoas muscle, which is the muscle that links the top and the bottom of the body, and really kind of trying to get that calmed back down again, and then kind of building on. So my job requires like a lot of pulling, like climbing and things, so I'm kind of then working on the opposing muscle groups as well to kind of try to build up muscles that haven't necessarily had as much work, that will then help support the body as a whole.
Time of balance then for you. And then yes. If you could be anywhere right now, where is your favorite place to go? Where would you like to be?
Well, I mean, I'd love to be back in the mountains. I'd love to be out climbing. But I'm actually, as crazy as it sounds, I'm actually really happy to be at home. I spend so much of my time on the road and traveling around, and not being, I suppose not kind of having time to collect thoughts and things, that I'm actually really enjoying, just spending time in one place at home, catching up with, like, I suppose boring things in life as well, like, your taxes and personal admin and stuff like that. And so I'm quite happy
enjoying being normal for a little bit. And but you've also got a gorgeous dog, I see from your Instagram, so you've got some company.
Yes, I do. Yeah, she's amazing. Tug. Yeah, she had to go in for an emergency operation actually at the start of lockdown. She had the most, like, the hugest bladder stone. It's like the size of a small orange.
Oh
no! Yeah, so she had to go and have that taken out. So she's just kind of recovered from that. So yeah, we're back out again together and running around.
So you're both having a nice time for recovery then. That's a nice, happy ending for the story, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.